Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. This is going to be a Serpentshrine Cavern guide for dummies. Just a quick, pretty much summary of all the bosses and what to expect. This guide will be good for both normal and heroic versions of SSC, but it will not cover anything Ascended, so just keep that in mind. The first boss you're going to run into is this big water elemental called Hydross. This is easily the beefiest mage pet you'll ever see, though he is just as useless as you really only have to worry about one mechanic if you're playing as DPS. This mechanic will also apply for healers and tanks, so we'll explain that first. The boss will occasionally cast Tidal Wave, which will one-shot anyone who didn't avoid it. It is easy enough to dodge since you have to just find this extremely bright water bubble and stand in it. You don't get any specific debuffs while you're in this bubble, and it always seems to spawn pretty close to the boss. So as long as you're somewhere nearby, it won't be an issue. You can solo tank this fight, but it would be a bit of a pain in the butt since the main tank mechanic is going to be pulling him in and out of this blue circle on the ground. The raid gets a stacking debuff when he's in the circle and a different stacking debuff when he's out of the circle. These debuffs increase all damage done to you by a specific element, and he will deal a passive AoE damage of the same element while this buff is stacking. We've found success pulling him out of the circle after the first tidal wave, or around 15 stacks. Obviously, the easiest way to transition him to the other element, aka pulling him out of the circle, is going to be to have another tank taunt him while that tank is standing outside of the circle. This will of course force the boss to run out of the circle to attack him, therefore transitioning. Now, every time you transition him, he will spawn a set of more set of water elemental adds. These adds will leave a pool of poison on the ground when killed, but again, this is also pretty easily avoidable. As I mentioned earlier, healers really only have to worry about the raid wire AoE damage going out. I would recommend saving any healing cooldowns for when the stacks hit around 10 to 15, or a little bit higher depending on when you all plan to transition him. The next boss is going to be a lot tougher. This is easily the second toughest fight in the raid, and his name is Lurker Below, or the Lurker Below. I'd expect to wipe at least a few times on this boss, especially if you have DPS players that don't know when to stop hitting buttons. This fight is also a massive healer check as well, so don't be afraid to throw in a few extra healers for this specific boss, as a lot of his mechanics will be doing raid-wide damage. His main mechanic is his Reflective Scales buff. This buff cannot be removed from the boss and deals 10% of the damage dealt to him back to the target. This means if you hit a super big, nasty, disgustingly sick crit on the boss, you'll be taking quite a bit of damage as well. This mechanic alone will cause a lot of raid-wide damage, but if the DPS watch their health bars and stop DPSing when they get low, it can make this fight much more manageable. This boss will also cast a few abilities, the first of which being Whirl. This is a simple AoE attack that will knock everyone around him back. Normally it will knock you into the water. Now, this water will be dealing tick damage and will be silencing you while you're in it, so you want to get out of it as fast as possible. You can avoid being knocked into the water if you're standing very close to him. You can also use one of the torches around the platform to catch the knockback. Additionally, he'll be casting Geyser. This will target a random player and deal a chunk of damage to them and anyone nearby. It will just knock you straight up in the air, so you don't have to worry about flying into the water for this one, but you can get hit by multiple geysers per cast, so it's not a good idea to stack very much for this spell. His last spell, and probably most dangerous, is called Spout. When he begins to take a deep breath, and you should see that big indicator on your screen, everyone should rush to try to get to his back. This is because he's going to soon channel a beam of water that will deal damage and knock anyone it hits off the platform. He will turn a little faster than you run, so unless you get a head start for this ability, you're not going to be able to dodge it. By itself, you may not die to it, but if you're already missing some health due to some of the other mechanics, you're definitely going to have a bit of a rough time. After a set amount of time, he will submerge. This will cause some melee adds and 3 set of range adds to spawn. These range adds will spawn in sets of 2 on each platform around the main circle. These should be focused down by ranged DPS, while the melee focus on killing the melee adds. Now, of course, the melee can jump into the water and go kill the ranged adds as well. It's just a lot easier if you happen to have the ranged DPS to do this. The range adds will attempt to focus fire a member of the raid down, so aggro normally isn't really an issue with these enemies. After a set amount of time, or after you kill the adds, the boss will return to his regular mechanics. Remember, this fight isn't a DPS race. As long as you're able to kill the adds that spawn on each submerge, you'll eventually be able to claim the loot for your own. Leotheras the Blind, or however you'd pronounce it, is going to be your third boss fight. Before you can actually fight this boss, you will have to kill the 3 Draenei channeling onto him, but they don't really have anything special going on, so just kind of mental note that, and we'll move on. He is going to start out in human form. 2 spinning glaives are just going to be fucking around with you the whole time. They're just going to go around the room. There's really nothing special to talk about that. They don't deal very much damage, but should of course be avoided if you can. He will cast blind on the tank from time to time. This is the only tank swap mechanic you'll need to worry about. After some time, he is going to cast a spell called Whirlwind. This will make him spin like a little Beyblade across the room. This will hurt a lot and apply a stacking bleed debuff if you get hit by it multiple times. Now, it is very difficult to avoid because, again, he is spinning just around the room, and he seems to kind of swap off a mini aggro table of some sort. So I would recommend heavily spreading when he's about to cast this. After some time, he'll swap to demon form. He will completely lose his aggro table and begin casting Chaos Blast on a random target. This target does need to run away from the other players because Chaos Blast, when it lands, will do a big AoE around that player. He'll also use a spell named Insidious Whisper. This will spawn a bunch of adds that target individual players that need to be focused down by that player. At 25%, he'll go into phase 2. This is just a combination of both the human form and the demon form. No new abilities are added. Again, it's just both at the same time. So if you were able to get him to 25% already, you're probably pretty comfortable with both the human and the demon form. So I wish you the best of luck cleaning that up at that point. Fathom-lord Karathress, again, butchering the pronunciation. This boss will require you to kill his entourage before focusing him down. As the Phantom Guards die, he will gain their unique abilities. The order they die in doesn't specifically matter, but I do have a recommendation that we found to be very successful. We have always started with killing Phantom Guard Karathress. This is because he randomly targets players. Along with this, he is able to enrage his pet, and without a way to dispel this enrage, it becomes very difficult. We focus Karathress first because we don't have a way to dispel that enrage, but you could easily focus someone else if you do. After that, we focus Charybdis. She will periodically cast Hurricane, which will summon a lingering lightning cloud. This does a high amount of damage and can easily catch DPS off guard, since it's something you have to look up for in the sky and you don't really have something at your feet to kind of indicate that too well. She is going to be casting a powerful AoE stun when you're focusing her down. This is normally only a problem for melee. It doesn't really do damage, it's just annoying, so you shouldn't have to go out of your way to avoid it. Finally, Hydross can be the most dangerous due to his totems. He is the only one that can be aggroed, so the tank should pull him and the Fathom-lord to 2 separate pillars so that Hydross can be moved around as his totems spawn. The most notable totem will send waves of fireballs out to nearby raid members, so the tank again will need to pull him away from the totems as they spawn. Once you kill all of these Phantom Guards, then you'll just have to focus down Fathom-lord, which is again just a combination of these mechanics we've already talked about. As long as you remember to pull him out of the totems, you shouldn't have any issue. Morogrim Tidewalker. Of course, every raid is going to have some ad fight to where ads just spawn 24/7. This is it. Morogrim himself doesn't have that much going on, but you will have to worry about Murlocs and bubbles. 2 types of bubbles will appear and be annoying throughout this fight. Bubbles that freeze you and bubbles that just outright kill you. The bubbles that kill you will attempt to lift you up to the ceiling. Now, other raid members are able to kill this bubble and save you from that fate, but if you reach the ceiling, you just instantly die. You don't fall to your death. Again, you just die when you touch the ceiling, so don't worry about any fall damage or levitate, nothing like that. The other type of bubble will slowly make its way towards the raid and freeze everyone nearby. Now, this is a mechanic that is annoying, but not super dangerous on its own since it doesn't deal any damage. It does seem to only pop on a specific player and then AoE around them, so you can attempt to run this player out of the raid to pop it, but it doesn't give an indication of who it is targeting, so good luck with that. Throughout the fight, he'll summon a bunch of Murlocs. Most of these can be ignored and cleaved down. The only exception will be a few that have unique names. One of these Murlocs will cast Mortal Strike. This is an ability that will reduce healing on whoever it hits, so this Murloc should especially be focused down along with the melee cleave already being applied. The only other Murloc I'm going to note in this kind of walkthrough is the Healer Murloc. He will spawn on this specific pillar from time to time, and he will begin healing the spawn Murlocs. Ranged DPS should immediately focus this healer down so that the rest of the Murlocs can be killed. And that's about it. Again, you do have some other named Murlocs spawn, but nothing too crazy going on. Again, as long as you follow the routine of focusing Murlocs with names, you should be fine. Lastly, we have the final boss, Lady Vashj. Vashj is definitely the hardest boss that has been released on Ascension yet, and it's due to these nasty mechanics. She has a total of 3 phases, and some of the mechanics do overlap. Ideally, you'll want to bring a Mass Dispel or some other way to dispel multiple magic effects, and a range class that is very mobile and good at kiting. This boss will start out by casting Static Charge. Now this will place Entangling Roots on everyone in the raid, and select a few individuals to debuff with a debuff named Static Charge. After a few moments, Vashj will cast Chain Lightning on these targets with Static Charge. It's very important that whoever has Static Charge is able to spread out so the Chain Lightning doesn't bounce. Entangling Roots can of course be removed with Mass Dispel. Other spells like Blink and some shape-shifting abilities should be able to remove it as well. She is also going to be casting Aim Shot. This will knock back the target, and a red line will appear between the target and the boss. This red line does need to be stood in by multiple members of the raid, or else the targeted individual will die. If not enough people go to soak this line, the people that did may end up dying as well. So it's really important to have as many people as possible soak this line. If you do have Mass Dispel, I'd heavily recommend stacking in one group for this first phase, since it makes the aim shot mechanic a lot more manageable. The tanks, in the meantime, will have to worry about Envenom. She'll cast this spell a few times, and it will easily one-shot a tank if not properly swapped to avoid multiple hits. When you get her to 60%, she'll transition to phase 2 and become immune to damage. So continue casting a bit of a conal AoE, but it can easily be out-healed, so it can be ignored for the most part. Be sure to turn on free-for-all loot for phase 2, because you will need to loot an ad that spawns during this phase. The raid will want to spread around the circle to kill water elementals that spawn before they reach the boss. These water elementals will give the boss a stacking buff if they reach her. She will also summon a set of melee ads. These ads will need to be tanked and killed, and they will spawn on each side of the platform, so tanks will need to spread, pick them up, and then probably want to bring them to the middle for cleave. Along with the melee ad, she'll summon a healer that will attempt to bring her to full health. This heal can and should be kicked while she's being killed. Also, a Hydra will spawn. This Hydra is very beefy and very slow. Now, due to its large amount of health, I would not recommend trying to kill this thing, but a ranged DPS should be able to easily kite it around the circle. Now, this Hydra will apply a slow, so it's important that the DPS kiting her has a healer on standby ready to cleanse this slow when needed. The last thing that's going to be spawning is Tainted Water Elementals. These will spawn throughout the encounter and will need to be killed and looted so you can obtain a Tainted Core. Specifically in Heroic, you cannot run with this Tainted Core. You will have to right click on it in your inventory to throw it to another raid member. These orbs should be brought to one of the 4 pylons in the center. Once you click this pylon, it will begin to overcharge, and all raid members should stand in the shield it creates so they don't die. Now, talking about dying, the rest of the ads will die when this outburst is complete, effectively resetting the state of the fight. You also take reduced damage while in this shield, which has a few additional benefits we'll talk about a little later. I should also mention that the ads do not gain this reduced damage buff, so you don't have to worry about bringing the ads into the shield, as they will gain no benefit from it. You'll need to repeat this process a total of 4 times, 1 for each pylon. Once this has been completed, you move directly into phase 3. Phase 3 has some of the same mechanics from phase 1 and phase 2. Firstly, Static Charge does make a comeback, though this version is much easier to deal with since you do not get rooted when it's cast. As a reminder, you still need to run this Static Charge out of the raid. The tanks will again have to worry about Envenom. Remember to swap aggro after each hit. The pylon mechanic from phase 2 will make a return, but this time they're randomly overcharged. I recommend trying to stay near the middle of the platform so you give yourself plenty of time to run to whatever pylon has been overcharged. As a reminder, you will take reduced damage in this shield. The only new mechanic the boss has in phase 3 is to spawn a spore bat. This bat will spawn atop the boss and begin to fly away. It should be focused down when possible to prevent it from leaving poison areas on the floor. The poison can be left on a pylon, but as long as you're in the shield, as a reminder, you take that reduced damage. So the poison isn't much of a problem on normal and heroic. One final note is the static charge can sometimes be applied when the pylon is also overcharged. You don't have to worry about spreading in this case, since she will not cast chain lightning when this pylon is overcharged. So make sure to run in that shield as fast as you can. That is going to cover all the important mechanics for the bosses in Serpentshrine Cavern. Definitely a fun raid, definitely a bit more difficult than Gruul and Mag that we've seen so far, and easily a lot tougher than Karazhan. So hopefully you guys have learned a lot, or at least learned something from this little guide. And again, remember, loot your trash and have a good day.